You ever administer insulin to patients?
No.
Not at all?
No.
I'm not going to find that what you're telling me, I'm not going to find that part of it's not true or all of it's not true.
No, sir. I will swear on this. Swear to it.
Would you be able to take a polygraph concerning this and pass it?
I will not take a polygraph.
Why not?
Why not?
I'm asking.
Because I have a torn ACL and I have constant pain and I wouldn't pass it.
Okay. The pain would make you not pass it.
Yes, sir.
The pen may be mightier than the sword, but in the hands of a twisted individual, even a simple syringe can become a deadly weapon. The Veterans Hospital is a place where veterans, those who've sacrificed so much for their country, should find solace. A place of healing and respite. But what if this sanctuary were turned into a house of horrors? What if the very people entrusted with care were the ones committing the crimes? What if this sanctuary became a silent killing ground? This is the chilling story of a nurse who used her position of trust to inflict pain and suffering on the very people she was sworn to protect. This is the story of a nurse who turned a Veterans Affairs hospital into a house of horrors.
Veterans who served our country were brave and courageous, followed the rules, did everything they were supposed to, and sought medical attention to get treatment. What they got was an incredible violation.
Imagine trusting someone with your life, only to find out they were secretly plotting your death. Serial killers often blend into the fabric of everyday life, adopting roles that grant them trust and access. Their calculated methods, from charm to cold calculation and ability to conceal their true intentions, make them terrifyingly effective in achieving their dark desires at any length. Reta Phyllis Mays was one of such. On the outside, she seemed like an ordinary nursing assistant at the Louis A. Johnson VA Medical Center. But on the inside, she hid a dark and deadly secret. Entrusted with the care of veterans who had served their country, Mays exploited her position in the most horrifying way imaginable. Over the course of several months, she silently murdered at least 7 veterans, administering lethal doses of insulin to those in her care.
We couldn't keep him in bed. They had given him PO Haldol, and that didn't work. So they gave him 2 shots of Haldol, and he still was wound up.
But it all started in June 2015 when Reta Phyllis Mays began her role as a nursing assistant at the Louis A. Johnson Veterans Medical Center in Clarksburg, West Virginia. Despite lacking certification or a license to administer medication, Mays was assigned to work overnight shifts on the hospital's medical surgical unit. By July 2017, the unit began experiencing a troubling pattern where elderly patients suffered sudden and severe drops in blood sugar levels. Over an 11-month period, there were multiple deaths resulting from this, and they were linked to hypoglycemia. But a lot of the victims were non-insulin dependent. Mays's role as a nursing assistant gave her access to the most vulnerable patients, and she exploited this position of trust. She could do that because the hospital pharmacy did not use the Veterans Administration mandated system to track its medication inventory, and supply rooms and medication carts were not locked. There were no security cameras covering common areas, including the rooms where medications were stored, so there were no records of Mays taking the insulin or security footage showing her in the areas where it was stored. This could only mean that she had the opportunity to take the insulin without being caught, but then there was no evidence that she had. The situation got really intense when 4 deaths happened within a span of 16 days. Among the casualties was Archie Edgell, an 84-year-old Korean War veteran, whose blood sugar plummeted to a dangerously low level. Although initially stabilized, Edgell's condition rapidly deteriorated after a subsequent insulin injection. Just like adding fuel to fire, he died eventually. According to the coroner, it turned out that Edgell had been injected 4 times. The hospital, alarmed by these unexplained incidents, launched an internal investigation into 11 suspicious deaths. It was only a matter of time before they would eventually discover her. This only meant that she couldn't continue working there and was dismissed in June 2018. The case was then handed over to the Inspector General for the United States Department of Veterans Affairs and the FBI. The ensuing investigation spanned over 2 years, during which Mays remained free and was interviewed 3 times, but each time she denied any involvement. In her second interview, which was conducted by the FBI, lasted over 5 hours and revealed lots of concerning evidence. While at first glance, Mays appeared to be a dedicated and compassionate healthcare provider, a deeper dive into her digital footprint revealed a disturbing pattern of thoughts and behaviors.
For whoever may have had a involvement in this, do you think there's ever a justification for doing something? I don't know why. That would be crazy to do something like that. That's basically taking a life. And that's not a good thing. Not at all.
Her social media accounts were filled with complaints about her patients and dark humor about restraining them. Despite not being authorized to administer medications, she often joked about the idea of medicating them. In one particularly disturbing Facebook message, she expressed frustration with having to deliver medication to doctors as they fought to save the life of a patient who would later become one of her alleged victims. Online searches revealed she had a morbid fascination with serial killers, particularly female serial killers. Mays had researched their methods, victims, and motivations. Additionally, she had watched Nurses Who Kill, which seemed to resonate with her in a troubling way. While these activities did not necessarily indicate criminal behavior, one episode featured a nurse who used insulin to kill patients. This episode, according to investigators, may have given Mays the idea that even those without medical training could easily take a life. Mays' personal life was also marked by turmoil. Her husband was incarcerated on child pornography charges during the investigation. Their phone calls, which were recorded, showed a disturbing pattern of dark thoughts and complaints about her patients.
I had to take turns relieving them for their breaks and stuff, as well as help on the floor. And then I had to, then at midnight, at 4 o'clock in the morning, I had to take over sitting one of the one-on-ones. The one I was sitting with, I wanted to freaking strangle.
What?
The morning after one of the unexplained hypoglycemic events, Mays confided in her husband and expressed a desire to strangle a patient she had been assigned to sit with. In another call, she complained about her sore arms from performing CPR on a victim and expressed frustration that the patient's family had not signed a do not resuscitate order. As the investigation deepened, evidence began to mount against Mays. Could this seemingly ordinary nurse have been responsible for the tragic deaths of her patients? The answer, it seemed, was a chilling affirmation. Since there was no order on file when the patient had experienced an unexplained hypoglycemic event the week before, the hospital staff had used all available measures to save his life. She had told her husband that the patient would have just fallen asleep and not woken up when his blood sugar level dropped to 30 if they had just done nothing, a statement that authorities found odd for someone without any formal medical education. The investigation into the murders committed by Reta Phyllis Mays concluded that she was responsible for the deaths of at least 7 veterans at the Louis A. Johnson VA Medical Center. These men, who had served their country with honor and valor, were entitled to receive the utmost care and respect in their final days. Instead, they fell victim to a horrific betrayal by someone who was supposed to be their caretaker and protector. The Louis A. Johnson VA Medical Center, where Mays worked as a nursing assistant, is part of the Veterans Health Administration, which is the largest integrated healthcare system in the United States. The VHA provides healthcare services to veterans and focuses on the unique physical, mental, and emotional challenges they face as a result of their service. These facilities are meant to serve as sanctuaries, where vets can receive the special care they deserve, from treatment for combat-related injuries to support for PTSD. So it's only appropriate that hospitals like these are staffed with professionals. However, the events that unfolded under Mays's watch were a stark deviation from this. Her crimes were not just a violation of the trust placed in her by her patients and their families, but also an assault on the integrity of the entire VA healthcare system. Every veteran deserves to feel safe and cared for in a place that is meant to be a sanctuary. The trust placed in the VA health system as a reward for their service to the nation by prioritizing their health was a central belief, but that trust would soon be broken when Mays started working at the center. Reta Mays, like her victims, was a veteran, having served in the Army National Guard from 2000 to 2001, and then from 2003 to 2004. During her service, she was deployed to Iraq and Kuwait, where she was involved in non-combat duties related to repairing chemical equipment. After leaving the National Guard in October 2006, following her final duty with the 115th Engineer Company in Clarksburg, Mays transitioned to a role as a nursing assistant. However, her transition to civilian life was not without its challenges. Before joining the VA, she had worked in a group home for adults with disabilities and as a corrections officer. While these roles may seem unrelated, they hinted at a complex and troubled individual. There, she advanced from caregiver to residential manager, overseeing 15 employees. Despite leaving the group home on good terms, her earlier career also included a stint as a corrections officer at the North Central Regional Jail from 2005 to 2012. This diverse background, combined with significant gaps in the hospital's vetting process, allowed her to evade detection while committing her crimes. While employed as a corrections officer, she faced serious allegations of excessive force. In 2013, she and several colleagues were named in a lawsuit claiming she had kicked an inmate, helped restrain him for another officer to stomp on his head, and then spat in his face, cursed at him, and threatened him. Mays and her co-defendants denied these accusations, and the lawsuit was ultimately dismissed by a federal judge. However, these accusations were not discovered by the VA Medical Center during her hiring process. She was eventually hired. There, she worked the night shift on Floor 3A of the Medical Surgical Unit. Her hiring and subsequent actions would later reveal critical lapses in the hospital's oversight. The hospital had not conducted thorough background and employment checks mandated for positions in federal agencies. Had these allegations been uncovered, Mays likely would not have been hired, or she could have been terminated during her probationary period, which ended in September 2016, months before the first murder occurred. The VA Medical Center had another chance to uncover these issues when Mays was nominated for the Nursing Assistant of the Year Award in December 2016. This prestigious award, part of the VA Secretary's Awards for Excellence in Nursing, came with a $500 prize and required a security check. Although Mays eventually received the award, just months after her first murder, the person responsible for the security check falsely marked it as completed and favorable, failing to uncover the problematic history that might have prevented her from continuing in her role. Despite lacking formal medical training, her role as a nursing assistant involved assisting patients with daily activities, monitoring vital signs, and providing constant supervision. Her involvement with several of the murdered veterans just before their unexplained hypoglycemic episodes also raised suspicions about her potential culpability. One of such cases which began her killing spree was George Nelson Shaw Sr., born in West Virginia in October 1936, lived a life rich in service and family. A devoted deacon at his church, he enjoyed hunting, reading, and gardening. George's distinguished 28-year career in the United States Air Force ended with his retirement as a senior master sergeant. Following his military service, he worked for 8 years at the Louis A. Johnson Medical Center, a Veterans Administration hospital in Clarksburg, West Virginia. However, in 2018, he returned to this hospital as a patient. Despite suffering from dementia, his condition was not deemed critical. Admitted on March 22, 2018, due to low blood pressure and dehydration, he was placed on Floor 3A of the Medical Surgical Wing rather than the ICU. His initial recovery allowed him to walk the hospital halls, but his health suddenly deteriorated. 4 days into his stay, he experienced an unexplained hypoglycemic event, causing his blood sugar levels to plummet without clear reason. Despite medical staff's efforts to stabilize him, his condition worsened and left him unable to communicate or care for himself. George passed away on April 10, 2018, at the age of 81. His family was troubled by the suddenness of his death and requested an autopsy. Although the autopsy revealed evidence of heart disease, the cause of death was attributed to congestive heart failure, dismissing any further investigation into his sudden decline. However, his family's suspicions about his sudden death were confirmed several months later, when authorities requested permission to exhume his body for further investigation. After receiving family consent, George's body was exhumed and sent to Dover Air Force Base in Delaware for a second autopsy, conducted on January 16, 2019. While the autopsy confirmed George had heart disease, it was not deemed the cause of his death. Instead, the examination revealed 4 unexplained injection marks on his body. Testing of the tissues around these marks indicated that George had been injected with insulin, despite him never having been diagnosed with diabetes or prescribed insulin. The Armed Forces medical examiner concluded that his death was a homicide caused by the deliberate administration of exogenous insulin. This intentional injection was aimed at inducing a hypoglycemic event, ultimately leading to his death. On the same day George was admitted to Floor 3A, another patient, Archie Dale Edgell, was also admitted. Archie, an 84-year-old Korean War veteran, was known for his musical talents and his long service as a street water commissioner in Salem, West Virginia. Like George, Archie's death was also surrounded by suspicious circumstances that would later be linked to the same pattern of unexplained hypoglycemic events at the hospital. Edgell had been sent to the medical center by his primary care physician for issues related to his dementia. The plan was to determine if his condition had advanced enough to warrant his transfer to the West Virginia Veterans Nursing Facility, which was a close enough state-run facility conveniently. Despite his dementia, Archie was not in critical condition upon arrival because he walked right into the hospital on his own. Given his type 2 diabetes, Edgell's blood sugar was tested upon admission, showing a slightly elevated reading of 165. The hospital staff decided not to administer insulin because they considered the level manageable. However, after just a few days in the hospital, Edgell's blood sugar levels inexplicably dropped to dangerously low levels, fluctuating in the 20s and 30s, which was a stark and alarming change with no clear medical explanation. His prescribed diabetes medications were withheld, and instead, he was given treatment to raise his blood sugar. Yet, these efforts were in vain. Edgell passed away on March 26, 2018, just 4 days after being admitted. The medical team had no explanation for his sudden hypoglycemia or his death, leading to him being buried without further investigation. His family, however, couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. When investigators approached them in November 2018 to discuss the possibility of exhuming his body for further testing, his son Steve knew that his father didn't die from natural causes. The family's fears were, however, validated when an investigation showed the suspicious nature of his death. Edgell's wife, Frances, lived long enough to hear that her husband's death was considered suspicious but sadly passed away in April 2019, 2 months before the report detailing the findings of his exhumation was released. Just like George Shaw, Edgell had several unexplained injection sites on his body. These areas tested positive for insulin, even though he was not administered insulin during his stay at the Lewis A. Johnson VA Medical Center. The new autopsy report described these findings as suspicious, and again pointed to unprescribed exogenous insulin administration. These incidents probed immediate investigations, but investigators also informed the families of Shaw and Edgell that multiple veterans' deaths were being re-examined, though the full scale of the problem remained hidden from the public until August 2019. This changed when the daughter of another veteran, Felix Kirk McDermott, submitted a statement of claim to the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Felix Kirk McDermott was a proud Vietnam War veteran who had retired from the United States Army with the rank of sergeant. After his military service, he worked as a truck driver and served in the Pennsylvania Army National Guard. Kirk's daughter, Melanie, later described him as an ornery character who would go out of his way to help others. In April 2018, 82-year-old Kirk was admitted to the Johnson VA Medical Center, suffering from pneumonia. He had also been diagnosed with dementia and was physically impaired due to a stroke. Despite these health challenges, Kirk's condition improved after his admission and he seemed to be on the mend. However, on the morning of April 9, 2018, Kirk suddenly began experiencing shortness of breath. Like those before him, blood tests revealed that his blood sugar had dropped to a critically low level, and despite the medical staff's efforts, they could not stabilize him. Kirk passed away at around 9 a.m. that morning. What made Kirk's death particularly alarming was that the hospital staff never informed his family about the hypoglycemic event that led to his demise. It wasn't until several months later that Kirk's family was contacted and told that his death might not have been due to natural causes. His remains were exhumed and examined at Dover Air Force Base, where, once again, unexplained injection marks were found on his body. Testing confirmed that Kirk had been injected with insulin, despite not having diabetes or being prescribed insulin. The deputy medical examiner who performed the autopsy concluded that Kirk's death was a homicide. Someone had deliberately injected him with insulin with the intent to kill. When Kirk McDermott's family was first informed that his death might be suspicious, they were also told that 9 or 10 other veterans had died under similarly mysterious circumstances on the same floor of the Johnson VA Medical Center before his death. This became a central issue in the claim Kirk's family later filed against the Veterans Administration. According to the attorney representing Kirk's daughter, the medical examiner's conclusion suggested that Kirk had been murdered while under the care and custody of the medical center. But the hospital was aware of prior wrongful insulin injections, which should have put them on high alert. But they weren't. The family's claim also showed a grave failure with the fact that despite evidence indicating that someone was murdering veterans at the hospital, the administration had taken no action to stop them. This inaction allegedly allowed the number of victims to increase, with as many as 20 veterans potentially murdered through unauthorized insulin injections over a period of nearly a year, from July 2017 to June 2018. By the time Melanie McDermott and her family filed their claim, a person of interest had been identified. However, since charges had not yet been filed against this individual, their identity was not publicly disclosed. This secrecy only added to the distress and frustration felt by the families of the victims, who sought justice for their loved ones. With a series of unexplained hypoglycemic events at the Johnson Medical Center, suspicions began to mount, leading to the identification of a person of interest early in the investigation, which officially commenced in June 2018. This probe was initiated almost a year after the first of these mysterious deaths occurred. During that time, the hospital staff had observed a troubling trend. They did not initially report their concerns, even as the number of deaths increased in early 2018. The turning point came when a physician, referred to as Hospitalist B, took action. Concerned that these deaths were not merely coincidental or medically explainable, Hospitalist B approached the hospital's Associate Chief of Staff. However, the initial response from the Associate Chief of Staff echoed a broader sentiment among the staff, which was skepticism that these events were anything more than medical anomalies. Most believed there was no need for further investigation. Nevertheless, Hospitalist B persisted, convinced that the pattern of deaths could be criminal in nature. This persistence paid off when the Veterans Affairs Office of the Inspector General was contacted on June 28, 2018. Their involvement marked the beginning of a deeper investigation into the deaths, which would eventually uncover a series of suspicious fatalities at the hospital, all linked by unexplained hypoglycemic episodes. The investigation into the suspicious deaths at the Louis A. Johnson Medical Center quickly escalated, with the FBI joining the probe the day after the VA Office of Inspector General was contacted. The U.S. Attorney General's office became involved a week later and signaled the seriousness of the situation. Initially, investigators focused on 8 cases that doctors had flagged as suspicious, hoping to identify a suspect and prevent further harm. Their efforts soon narrowed down to 3 hospital employees who had been present during the times when these unexplained hypoglycemic events occurred. Through electronic records, investigators confirmed that only one of these employees had been on floor 3A, the area where all the suspicious deaths took place, at the relevant times. The other 2 employees were verified to have been in different parts of the hospital, eliminating them as potential suspects. This left Reta Mays as the only remaining person of interest. Despite the ongoing investigation, Mays continued working at the hospital until July 5, 2018, when she was removed from patient care duties. The case against her continued to build, primarily on circumstantial evidence. After all, she had been assigned as the nursing assistant to sit with several of the men who later became victims of unexplained hypoglycemic events, a fact that raised suspicions among authorities. Mays was interviewed by investigators 3 times. During her first interview, she spent much of the time complaining about her job and expressed frustration about being asked to work in other areas of the hospital or to perform tasks she felt were beneath her position. Despite these complaints, she denied any involvement in the suspicious deaths. However, hospital technology records revealed that immediately after her first interview, she returned to her workstation and began searching for a new job. This behavior, along with the fact that Mays was the only person with access to all of the patients who suffered unexplained hypoglycemic events, led investigators to believe she was the most likely perpetrator.
I did not give him insulin. I have never given a patient insulin. I have never injected anyone with insulin. That I will swear on my grandchild's life that I have never given anyone an injection of insulin.
However, the case against her remained circumstantial, as there was no direct physical evidence linking her to the insulin used in the murders. They also did not have any fingerprints or other physical evidence tying Mays to the insulin. The investigation, therefore, went on for 2 more years, despite the almost immediate identification of Mays as the prime suspect. Circumstantial evidence against her continued to pile up. In March 2019, Mays was ultimately terminated from her position after investigators determined that she had provided dishonest answers during interviews related to the investigation. With her removal and the accumulating evidence, Mays emerged as the prime suspect in the tragic and disturbing series of deaths. But she was not taken into custody until July 14, 2020, 2 years after the investigation into the suspicious deaths at the Louis A. Johnson Medical Center began. She did, however, acknowledge during the 3rd interview that the evidence was pointing towards her as the person who had killed the patients. But this wasn't until after the 3rd interview when she went to the courthouse in order to fill out an affidavit requesting a court-appointed attorney. However, she was not eligible for one at the time, since she had not been charged with a crime and investigators had not named her in a target letter. Once investigators learned that she had gone to the courthouse, they decided that she may be more willing to speak with them once she had legal representation. They issued a target letter stating that they believed she had committed several crimes, which allowed her to be assigned 3 court-appointed attorneys in the following weeks. Mays and her attorneys then began the process of negotiating a deal in which she would plead guilty to the murders and the assault charge that authorities believed they had the evidence to successfully prove in court. The families of the victims were all consulted, and they agreed to Mays pleading guilty rather than going to trial. On that day, she appeared in federal court and pleaded guilty to 7 counts of second-degree murder and 1 count of assault with intent to commit murder. The assault charge was related to the case of Russell R. Posey, a 92-year-old Navy veteran who served during World War II. While Mays admitted to injecting Posey with insulin, prosecutors did not believe they had sufficient medical evidence to definitively prove that the injection caused his death. Although approximately 20 deaths were considered suspicious during the investigation, prosecutors determined they could not prove her involvement in all of them beyond a reasonable doubt. But ultimately, she confessed to murdering 7 veterans, including George Nelson Shaw Sr., Archie Dale Edgell, and Felix Kirk McDermott, by injecting them with insulin while they were hospitalized. She was sentenced on May 11, 2021. At the sentencing hearing, her lawyers asked the judge to sentence her to 30 years in prison, a sentence at the lower end of sentencing guidelines for the crimes she had pleaded guilty to. During her sentencing hearing, Mays' lawyers argued for a lesser sentence, citing her troubled past and PTSD diagnosis stemming from a sexual assault she suffered while in the military. Mays herself expressed remorse, acknowledging the pain she had caused. However, the victims' families were less forgiving. Melanie Proctor, daughter of one of the victims, condemned Mays's actions, calling her a coward for preying on vulnerable men. Judge Klee delivered a scathing rebuke, rejecting the notion that Mays was a victim of her circumstances. He stated that she was the worst kind, the kind that no one sees coming. His words echoed the sentiment shared by many who saw Mays not as a tragic figure but as a calculating predator. The case sparked widespread outrage and prompted investigations into the VA healthcare system's practices and oversight. The incident raised questions about the vulnerability of elderly patients and the importance of ensuring adequate care and supervision in healthcare facilities. He sentenced Mays to 7 life sentences, 1 for each murder, plus 20 years for the assault charge. The judge did recommend that Mays serve her sentence at Federal Medical Center Carswell in Fort Worth, Texas, as requested by her lawyers, because the facility offers specialized mental health treatment for inmates. However, Mays was ultimately sent to Federal Correctional Institution Aliceville, a low-security facility in Alabama, to serve her sentence instead. While Mays's victims received justice, the loved ones they left behind were still without answers. Mays did not speak of her motive for the murders in court during her initial plea or at her sentencing. Mays did speak with investigators following her guilty pleas being entered, and she claimed that 2 different motives led her to commit the murders, although the first reason she provided was clearly a lie meant to make her look better. Mays claimed that she believed she was being merciful by ending her victims' lives and allowing them to pass gently. However, none of her victims had been in danger of dying before she injected them with insulin. They were all expected to survive whatever had brought them to the hospital. Most of their conditions had improved while they were being cared for in the hospital, and some of them were very close to being discharged. Her injecting these men with insulin did not save them from a painful death. It instead inflicted one upon them. The effects the injections had on the veterans were horrifying. The hypoglycemic events Mays caused resulted in victims spending hours or days suffering from their side effects. Records show that her victims experienced agitation, loss of motor control, cold sweats, difficulty breathing, and a variety of other severe symptoms as a result of her injecting them with insulin. While Reta Mays was prevented from causing further harm to patients, the question of how she had been able to kill so many people over an extended period of time without detection remained. According to Veterans Affairs Inspector General Michael J. Missel, while Reta Mays was responsible for the heinous criminal acts, the facility's severe clinical and administrative failures allowed her actions to go undetected. On the day of Mays's sentencing, the Department of Veterans Affairs Office of Inspector General released a comprehensive 100-page report that detailed these failures at the Lewis A. Johnson VA Medical Center. This failure in basic medical and administrative protocols created the environment in which Mays could carry out her crimes unnoticed for an extended period. It's clear that Mays's reign of terror was only made possible by a perfect storm of institutional neglect and a medical facility's epic blunders. But at the very least, Mays got one thing right. She'll be staying in a facility for a very long time, just not the one she expected.